There's some major news circulating right now about the national effort to strip suppressors and short-barreled rifles out of the National Firearms Act once and for all. A lot of you probably heard that both the Hearing Protection Act and the Short Act were folded into House Resolution 1, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. But here's the catch. The version that passed only eliminated the tax burden. It didn't wipe the NFA clean. Naturally, that half measure kicked off a wave of lawsuits aiming to challenge the entire legal foundation of the NFA. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. Now, let me just say this up front if you're watching this. I'm guessing you care a hell of a lot about the Second Amendment, just like I do. The frustrating part, even law-abiding gun owners, folks who follow the rules, are still finding themselves on the wrong side of the law because of technicalities most people don't even know exist. A small oversight or misunderstanding can land you in a jail cell. So let's break it down. As I mentioned earlier, both the Hearing Protection Act and the Short Act made it into House Resolution 1. If you've been following our updates, you know this bill finally cleared the House last week. But the version of these two acts that made the cut only did one thing. It took that old $200 tax for items like suppressors and short-barreled rifles and dropped it to zero. From where I stand, that's barely a win. Sure, no more tax, but the registry is still intact. The restrictions are still there. What I wanted, and what most of you probably wanted, was a full-scale repeal. Unfortunately, weak-kneed politicians in Congress didn't have the backbone to push for the real thing. They caved instead of fighting for the full deletion of suppressors and short-barreled rifles from the NFA. And when this thing hit the Senate, nobody wanted to challenge the parliamentarian either. So the version we got? It gutted the tax, but left the core of the NFA standing. But here's the good news. This battle's far from over. The second that $0 tax language passed, Gun Owners of America, Firearms Policy Coalition, Palmetto State Armory, and Silencer Co. came together to launch a new lawsuit against the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And I'm also hearing that there's another case on the way, this one with the Firearms Policy Coalition, National Rifle Association, Second Amendment Foundation, and the American Suppressor Association, all teaming up for their own legal offensive. So what's the argument behind these lawsuits? In short, the NFA's foundation is crumbling. When Congress passed the National Firearms Act back in the year 1934, it was framed entirely as a tax measure. That $200 fee on making or transferring certain firearms like suppressors, short-barreled shotguns, and short-barreled rifles was the legal hook. And the Supreme Court only upheld it because it fell under Congress's authority to tax. But now, that tax is gone. Thanks to the Big Beautiful Bill signed on July 4, 2025, nearly every item regulated under the NFA, whether it's a suppressor, an SBR, or an SBS, no longer carries any tax at all. That means the constitutional excuse for the NFA has disappeared. And since it wasn't built on any other Article 1 power, there's no legal ground left for the government to stand on. Bottom line, without that tax in place, the NFA's rules on untaxed firearms are no longer constitutional. That's what the lawsuits are pushing hard for: total elimination of these outdated, unnecessary restrictions. So yeah, the tax is gone, but the registry? Still there. The red tape? Still there. The legal threat hanging over gun owners' heads? Absolutely still there. Which is why this next phase of the fight, these lawsuits, is so important. The end goal isn't just making it cheaper to own a suppressor or an SBR. It's making it free in every sense, from taxes, from tracking, and from infringement. Gun Owners of America lays out a bold case, arguing that while the one big beautiful bill eliminated the tax tied to National Firearms Act regulated items, it left the rest of the law untouched, including the registry and the transfer restrictions. That means for items like suppressors and short-barreled rifles, which no longer carry a tax, the federal government is still demanding registration and applying restrictions without the original constitutional justification of taxation. The plaintiffs in this case, which include both individual gun owners and Second Amendment advocacy organizations, are asking the court to declare those leftover NFA provisions unconstitutional for any firearm that is now untaxed under the new law. The first claim raised in this suit is for a formal legal declaration. They want the court to rule that the NFA's registration, manufacturing, and transfer mandates over these untaxed firearms like suppressors, short-barreled shotguns, short-barreled rifles, and any other weapon category go beyond what Congress is allowed to do under Article 1 of the Constitution. GOA's legal team makes it crystal clear these rules were originally upheld as a tax measure. But now that Congress has zeroed out that tax, those restrictions don't have a leg to stand on, constitutionally speaking. In the second count, they're asking for an injunction, basically a legal stop order barring the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and all of its agents from enforcing those NFA rules on these now untaxed categories of firearms. If successful, this would put an end to the registry and transfer regulations for suppressors, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and any other weapon devices under current law. So to break it all down, this legal challenge is aimed squarely at what's left of the NFA. Following the tax repeal in the One Big Beautiful Bill, the plaintiffs are pushing for a court ruling that says, look, without a tax, these restrictions no longer have constitutional backing, and they want the ATF completely blocked from applying those rules to law-abiding Americans who own these types of firearms. This lawsuit was filed in the Northern District of Texas, which happens to be a stronghold for pro-Second Amendment rulings. That court has been the battleground for several key wins in recent years, like the Vanderstock decision on unfinished frames and receivers, commonly known as 80% lowers, and the lawsuit that challenged the ATF's overreach on pistol braces. Those cases were pivotal, and they came out of that same court. And if we're lucky, this case could land in the courtroom of Judge Reed O'Connor, who's built a reputation for carefully weighing ATF-related lawsuits and often siding with individual rights when it comes to the Second Amendment. With a solid track record of pro-freedom rulings, there's real hope that this challenge could land a serious blow against the NFA's remaining grip on untaxed firearms. That said, from where I stand, it's pretty clear that no matter how this case shakes out in the lower court, an appeal is practically guaranteed. It's almost certain this will get bumped up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And given the Supreme Court's 6-3 decision last month, the idea of a nationwide injunction seems unlikely at this stage. Any potential relief would probably only apply to members of the organizations bringing the lawsuit, or to customers of the companies involved, nothing beyond that. If this case does move up to the Fifth Circuit, I'd expect them to put a stay on any ruling in favor of the plaintiffs. The judges are going to be hesitant to shake up the current enforcement of the National Firearms Act while the case is still in play. And even if this suit ends up successfully challenging the entire structure of the NFA, especially where it applies to suppressors, short-barreled rifles, and short-barreled shotguns, I wouldn't be surprised if the court hits the brakes with another stay. The courts have shown again and again that they don't want to upend the status quo while litigation is ongoing. Now, of course, that's just my take based on what we've seen in past cases coming out of federal courts in Texas and how they've traveled through the appeals process. I'm not saying that's set in stone, but if history's any guide, that's the direction this could go. Here's where things get interesting. One wild card in all this is how the Trump-era ATF might handle the case. Their response could change the whole dynamic. We've already seen the current administration shift its stance in a number of Second Amendment cases, sometimes in surprising ways. So, there's a real chance that they might acknowledge the core of the plaintiff's argument that with the NFA tax now reduced to zero, the law has essentially lost its constitutional footing. If the ATF admits that, without the tax, it no longer has the statutory authority to enforce registration or transfer restrictions on suppressors and short-barreled firearms, we could see a fast-track victory, at least in the short term. Would that be a major concession on their part? Absolutely. But again, we've already seen this administration take some unexpected turns when it comes to gun rights lawsuits. So what comes next? First, we wait to see which judge gets assigned to this case in the Northern District of Texas. If it ends up on the desk of someone like Judge Reed O'Connor, who has a solid record of reining in ATF overreach, that could be a good sign for gun owners. After that, we'll be closely watching to see how the ATF chooses to respond, whether they dig in or shift position. All of this follows the recent passage of the Hearing Protection Act and the Short Act as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill, which dropped the NFA tax down to $0. That was a big move in Congress, but it didn't wipe out the registry or the rest of the red tape in the NFA. That's where these new lawsuits come in to strike down what Congress didn't. So hats off to Gun Owners of America, Firearms Policy Coalition, Palmetto State Armory, Silencer Co., and others that are leading the charge to challenge the remaining NFA restrictions that are still on the books. If we win this one, it could reshape the legal landscape for suppressors and short-barreled firearms across the country. As this case continues to unfold, I'll be right here bringing you the latest updates. If you want to help the channel grow, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can also visit my website, armscholar.com, where you can sign up for a free legal guide, check out some great gear, and browse curated deals that'll help you save money while staying prepared. Thanks again for tuning in, and remember, this country was founded by patriots who knew their rights, and it'll be preserved by citizens who stay informed and stand firm.